So these are parts for for two side notes. One side note here, one side note there. This is note 5, note 6. And each of the side nodes, these are the side nodes here. They consist of two halves with like a recessed split down the middle. So this is the top half, the one right there that's got the Vanguard symbol on it. Bottom half here, and then that little strip becomes that recessed division. And each side node contains some internal supports that are going to be these. So there's a pair of each size, a large and a small, for each side node. So there's one large one there, another one in the bottom half, a small one there, and another one in the bottom half. So we'll get to these later. And just like with the this node, the instructions show what these parts look like when the bend lines are highlighted, so you can actually see where those go. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and score the bend lines, use our marker to kind of color in the tabs, cut out the piece, fold it, and then before we glue it, we're going to do the same thing we did with the other node, where we have to mark some lines for where the internal supports go. So let's score it. Now, for these side nodes, you'll notice this face right here is actually the face that's up underneath there. So this face right there, that glues down onto the recessed split. And right here, so there's the top face and there's the bottom face. That face on the bottom half. And they each have these little notches in them right here. Those are remains of an experiment I did when I very first set up this prototype model. My original idea was to have these nodes actually not be glued to the body, but have them be separate pieces. And then I had magnets mounted inside the nodes, and the foam core, I actually wrapped steel cable around it. So when the core was inside the body, the magnets would be attracted to the steel cable that's wrapped around the thing. And the idea was to have it so that I could, I don't know, have the nodes come off like they do on the Ghost in the game. And so I got so far as this prototype actually has the wire cable wrapped around the ball, so it's got a little bit of heft to it. And I had started putting magnets in all of these nodes, and the first few nodes it was working great. They attracted, once I found the right type of magnets that were strong enough to stick on there, and they were actually sticking on pretty well. So I went in and I designed this notch out of here, so when it comes together, there was a little space where I could put a magnet in there. And anyway, it worked okay for the first few nodes, but then by the time I got more and more nodes attached to the body, the magnetic fields were doing weird things, and they were interacting with each other in ways I didn't expect. And so you'd put one node on and it would push another node away. Even if I tried to line up the poles of the magnets, it would still, just with so many magnets in close proximity to each other, it was such a hassle that I just started thinking this wasn't really worth it, because, I mean, what was I going to do anyway? It's not like I could make them spread apart like they do in the game. They don't float in real life, right? So I started to wonder what the point even was of having them be separate. So I just scrapped that whole idea, took the magnets out. And in fact, these nodes used to have like pieces of paper that would fill in like this surface right here. So there'd be like the inverse of a sphere that was right here, so that they would fit up against the thing. And when they came apart, there wouldn't be a big hole in it like that. But that became unnecessary, so I took those parts out. So now we've just got the tabs that glue directly to the body. But there is still this little artifact of a notch here, and I was going to have to, it wasn't going to be easy to take that notch out of the model. I'd kind of have to redo a whole bunch of stuff, and it would have been a lot of work. So it wasn't worth it. So I left the notch on there. If you cut that out and build it like that with a little gap in there, it's going to work just fine. It's not going to affect anything. If you don't want to do that, you can just draw a line straight across, not cut that notch out. You're not going to see this part. It ends up being buried up back inside, so you won't ever see it anyway. But if you want, just for that extra little bit of strength, you can go ahead and do that. Put a tab on there and cut there instead of, well, don't cut there. Bend there and then cut there. And then just ignore that little extra bit of texture there. Like I said, it'll probably would be fine without those. In fact, this prototype is built that way. It's got those little notches in there, and it ended up working just fine. So not a big deal, but I don't know if they bug you, you could go ahead and do that. And then while I'm at it, let me see, this edge here is right here. So that face is going to be that face there. So that edge is here. I think there's room to expand some of these, like I said on the other node. You can expand some of these tabs just to give you a little bit of extra glue surface. That one I think I'm going to leave as is because it's got the cut back. That one is going to be this edge, which has plenty of room for a full tab. So it's got a normal tab on that side, but here it's cut it way back. I am not going to do that. I'm going to have it be a full tab just for extra glue surface, extra strength. I think the rest of these are probably fine. Yeah. So this is one of those ones, just like with the top node, where there's a little triangular notch in the texture, and the bend line goes from the top of that notch all the way out to that vertex there, and then there's another bend line from the top of that notch all the way up to that vertex there, and then there's the same thing on the other half of this side node right there. There's a little notch in the texture, so watch out for that. All right, so we've scored, cut, folded, and we're ready for adding the marking the lines for the internal supports. And if you look at the instructions, you'll see some measurements of where those where those lines should be marked. And the best way to do this is to start with this face. We'll do the markings on this face. Skip over this one for now, and then we'll go to this face, do the markings on this face. Then once we've marked both of those, then we'll come to this face and do the markings on this face. And the reason we do that is because once you've marked off these ones, then most of the work's already done here, and we just have to kind of connect the dots, and then it's just one final measurement to do on this. So on this first face here, what we'll want to do is take a measurement from this vertex here and go down 22.3 millimeters and make a mark. And then we'll do from the same vertex down 40.6 millimeters and do another mark, because remember there's going to be 2 internal supports in this node. So we'll put those 2 marks, and then we'll go over to this vertex and measure down 25.7 millimeters along this bend line. Make the mark there, and then again from this vertex, measuring along this bend line, 46.8 millimeters, put a mark there, and then we'll just connect a line from this mark to this one, and then from this mark to this one. So, and I do recall that the instructions are going to show basically like this face here in this orientation, but you do want to make sure you're marking on the back side, right? So we're going to flip this around. So just mentally flip that image in your mind and make sure you get that the right way around. Okay, so we're going to do from, this vertex, flipping around here, then we're going 22.3 millimeters down. First one, and then from that same vertex, we'll just keep it the ruler there. We're going to measure 40.6. So there's 40 and about half. Okay, there's our first 2 marks. Now, I'm going to measure from this vertex along this bend line. So flip it around, go in there, and we want to okay, so now we've got 2 pairs of lines. So we'll just draw a line between. There we go, first set of marked lines. Now we're going to go skip this face, go over to this one. And again, the instructions are showing the face from this direction. What we're going to do is we're going to go from this vertex here, measure along this bend line 12.6 millimeters, and then we're going to go to this vertex right there and measure along this bend line 12.2 millimeters. We need lines on the other side so we know, or marks on the other side so we know how to draw the lines. But this face folds over to this face, right? So this line is basically equivalent to this line. So we're going to use the same measurements that we used for that. So 22.3 from there to there, and then 40.6 from there to there is going to be the same thing. And this is the kind of the reference 0, the reference vertex is going to match up with this vertex here. So that's going to match there. Then we go 22.3 this way, and then 40.6. Okay, so that should be a line across here and then a line across there. Okay, so now when those two edges join up, essentially those reference lines meet up. All right, so the final face, this one here, instructions are going to show it like that essentially. And the final dimension that we need, we have almost all the ones we need because we want to connect up that point to that point. Let's go ahead and just do that. Okay, those line up. That'll be the three sides of a triangle when that gets folded up. And then we need one more line from here over to a point over here. So that's why we need one final dimension, and it's going to be a distance from that vertex, 12.8 millimeters in. There we go. And then we just connect from that point to that point. And there we are. Now we don't really worry about having a marked line on this face. There's no glue line there. What we're really doing is we've got this 1, 2, and 3 faces here match up with the 3 lines that we've marked. This is the bigger one that goes back here. So it's 1, 2, and 3. We don't worry about that one there. That's actually going to correspond to this little section of straight line here, which doesn't have a glue flap, so we don't have to worry about that. It'll just be in place once we get these 3 faces lined up. And then for the smaller ones, we've just got 1, 2, and 3 there. It's going to be 1, 2, and 3. So there we go. So that's how you that's how you mark the internal supports on these side nodes. Now for the bottom half, same thing, just kind of mirror image, but it'll be the same measurements. All right, next thing we want to do actually is, let's go ahead and get these pieces cut out for the internal supports. So we're going to need 1 of each size. Now they're really all the same. I know this one is kind of like mirror image of that one, but it doesn't really matter which ones you do. When you do put the flaps in here, you want the flaps kind of towards the bigger side of things, just so if you put the flaps on this side, there might just, in some cases, might not be quite enough room for a flap there. So just to avoid that potentiality, we're just going to put the flaps on the bigger side of each one. So when you cut this out, you just, whichever direction folds it to put it in that spot, is really all that matters. So I'm just going to pick this one here. Yeah, I do want these to kind of be, these bends to be as accurate as possible. We had a little bit of an issue on this node when we were putting the internal support in there, that I put it probably a little too far this way, and so these glue faces didn't match up to this face perfectly, and so it bows in just a tiny little bit, which is really hard to notice except right there at the edge where it glued. You can see it bows in just a little bit there and even a little bit there. So we do want to try to make these as accurate as we can, just to avoid issues like that. The big one goes in the back. I'm going to kind of pre-fold this to see what shape that gives me. So these two, this corner right here should be a right angle. So that should tell me which way this triangle should go once this all gets folded up the way it's supposed to be. So there's the right angle right there, right here. So that this corner right here goes up at this corner here. So actually I have to flip it this way in order to get it to fit in there like that. And since we want the flaps to be towards the bigger side, I'm going to want to fold these this way. So those will end up being mounted folds from this direction. So let's go ahead and do that. Now this one, on the larger node, we had to set back. We couldn't match up the corner with the corner. There's supposed to be a little bit of a gap. But this one is designed to actually, since this face and this face both have to contact, that really puts that corner all the way in the corner there. So that helps to get things aligned and not have to worry about whether this is too far forward or too far back to match this face here. So just like with the larger node, you want to line it up with the marked line. You want to line up the bent line, the bent edge with that marked line. You don't want to do it, you don't want to line up the edge of the flap with the line. That's wrong. That'll put it in the wrong spot. Either that way or that way. That'll be wrong. You want to make sure you get the bent edge lined up with the marked line all the way across. So when we go to fold this, I'm trying to figure out which one I should glue first. When we go to fold this, it's going to be like this, and then this is going to fold up there. So I think we need to glue this line first, and then fold this down and glue this line. And then this one's going to have to come down last over this top of this flap, and then this edge of the support. So I think we'll glue that one in first. And again, this corner here is the right angle, which corresponds to that corner there. So this face, well, okay, like this. This edge glues to this edge. Looks good. Okay. All right. So there's that one. Let's go ahead and get the small one in there as well. Okay, I want to do the same idea here. We have to figure out which way to bend these flaps and which edge goes where. So again, this is the right angle corner that corresponds with, this is going to be the right angle corner here. It's kind of an imaginary corner. So that might make it easier to see if I line up those edges. So you can see that edge, if it continued, would go up to there. So there's our right angle corner. So that's going to go there, which means we essentially have to flip this around just like we did the other one. And then these are going to want to fold towards the big end. So these will be mountain folds just like last time. Okay, just gonna line those up. Not easy to do. Doubt that I'll be able to do it in such a way that you can actually see what I'm doing, but I'll try. Essentially just looking through that gap there, looking to see that the bent edge of the support is more or less lined up with the marked line. Which more or less is there. Oh, I shifted that a little bit. You can see there's kind of a step there. Darn it, didn't notice that. Well, you can bend that down a little more there so it's not as obvious, but it will make that face a little bit crooked. That one will be a little wonky. Not redoing this edge. I'm gonna pull it apart just for that. That's pretty egregious, but we can do our best to hide that mistake. I think it'll be okay. These other edges look like they're going to be okay. Yep. Okay, so before I forget again, let's color those edges. So normally after I get everything all bent up and glued together, these creased edges can sometimes have the texture crack and flake, especially see that where that's a really sharp bend. You can see some white of the paper underneath poking through. And so I'll go along with, and this is one where I'll try to get as close to the color as I can to match the color as I can. But I'll just kind of lightly go over that. Don't want to linger too long because the paper will absorb the color from this and kind of bleed through. You can see it did a little bit there. Just kind of hit that a little bit. And then I think that looks just fine. Kind of darkens the edge a little bit, but I think it looks better than the white. And it really kind of fits with the aesthetic of this ghost anyway, where it's kind of got this dirty, mottled texture going on. Then if the edge is a little mottled, patchy, then it just fits in nicely. So I want to do the same thing there. I'll wait till I get that glued though. Usually kind of do a final pass of that stuff once everything's all glued up and I'm done fiddling with things. So probably after, wait until get the bottom half of this side node and then that recessed ridge piece, glue the whole thing together into one complete side node, and then, yeah, maybe even wait till I glue it all together on the final glue on the assembly on the body. Yeah, okay, so let's fix that little mistake there. Well, not really fixing it, we're hiding it, right? Okay. There we go. Top half of that node is done. Basically just repeat those steps for the bottom half. So I'll go ahead and put together the bottom half off camera, and then come back with the two halves. We'll finish up by putting assembling that little recessed division strip, and we'll put the two together. This piece is a little strip that goes into the recessed split between the two halves of the side node, and it just gets folded up into a loop and then placed in between. It follows this shape, so if you're not sure exactly how this is supposed to bend, you can just look at the white outline on there. It's supposed to follow that shape. And you can look at the bend lines. Well, the bend lines are really easy to see on this one. It's just in between every one of these flaps where it notches down, there's a bend line there, etc. And they're all mountain folds except for this one and this one. Those are both valley folds. Okay, so now that I've got this glued together into a loop, I've trimmed a few of the tabs because of the sharp angles that I have to bend this to. They were interfering with each other, so I trimmed those back. Might need to do a little bit more there, we'll see. But it seems to be test fitting pretty good. So the idea here is, in order to get this in the right spot, you'll see there's on here, the texture changes from a gray to a white, and that pretty much happens right at where you want to line up the bend lines of this little strip. But I will say the most critical thing of this fit is you want to make sure these three short faces don't stick too far in. This is obviously way exaggerated, but just to show you which direction I mean. So if they stick too far in here, this is the surface that has to mount to the sphere of the paper. And so if this is sticking too far inward, then that's going to cause a problem with trying to mount that. So what I was doing is lining up this bend line here against that textured edge. And if I line it up perfectly, then it looks like this sticks out just a little bit. You can see that on camera. If it sticks out into that a little bit. So I'm going to avoid that by, instead of holding this line to be sacred, I'm going to push that back in this way a little bit, just till it's about flush with the edge that's already here on the node half. And then I think I can still go ahead and keep this direction just fine. But if I push that back a little bit, that it ends up being, you can see that there, it's off the texture, past the texture this direction a little bit. And that's okay. It's better that it fits properly than trying to maintain some sacred distance there. So I'm going to glue this edge first. Since this is at the front of the ghost, you're going to see that. Okay, so now for gluing the subsequent edges, since I've already kind of offset this from the texture a little bit, I can't necessarily use the texture as good of a guide. So what I'll do is I'm just going to make sure that the strip is parallel with the edges of the node. So like something like that. Okay, so for locating the second half on top of here, normally I would just say you just kind of line up corners, vertexes, edges with each other, because this is a plane of symmetry here, so it should be the same on both sides. But I did build this one a little poorly, so some of those edges are not all the edges are going to be parallel and coplanar and everything, so I just kind of have to, some of that is going to get made up in the interface here. It can hide some of that slop, and I think it's going to end up being just fine. But it is going to make it a little more difficult for me to figure out exactly how this should line up. One thing you can do is this back face should be completely flat. So I like to use that as kind of a datum. Rest the two parts against the table, and that, at least if I apply a little bit of pressure downward, it makes sure that those two faces are coplanar. And then just try to line up the other edges that I can see. Also keeping in mind that I want to make sure that this face, again, if I don't install this too far back, right, we want to have those be as flush as we can, if flush is the right word to use for a spherical surface, because that's an important mating surface to the outer sphere. So we do want to kind of just make sure that that's not too bad. One thing I will say, be a little careful when you're putting pressure to put these two halves together. I put the internal supports there, definitely help. This used to be a lot worse. You can now actually apply a good a decent amount of pressure to close that. But you still don't want to put too much on because you will end up kind of collapsing in this bottom face, or especially this little corner right here seems to be prone to kind of pushing in a little bit like that. And the end result is you can see it on here where it just kind of collapses in and doesn't really look straight anymore. So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure, kind of pushing downward, just to make sure that those two faces stay flat against the table, and then also pushing inward just a little bit. And I'm applying that pressure in the spots where the internal supports are. So right about there, you can feel them in there, and then right about there. That way, I have less chance of deforming these faces. But still, again, be careful. Just apply just enough pressure that is required and no more. You'll just have to feel it out. All right, there it is. Side node complete. This half was definitely much better than this half, so as long as you don't make any bad mistakes like I did in shifting that face while I was gluing it, they do turn out pretty good. Side node done.